Over the past 2 years, I've been interviewing marketing leaders at top fintech companies on how they do content. And these are really some of the top fintech companies, including fintechs like Adyen, Truly You, Unit, and Pleo, just to name a few. At the time, we published those as separate case studies, but now we've put it all into one lovely ebook. The reason I started is because at the time I was looking for tips, benchmarks, or any case studies on how fintech or financial services companies do content marketing. And I couldn't really find much. I think anyone who's in this space knows that a lot of content marketing advice is very specific to SaaS. And it's kind of one of my pet peeves because in my mind, SaaS is quite different to fintech, right? And so a lot of the advice out there doesn't address, the endless compliance reviews, the complexity of explaining payments infrastructure to prospects, and what is the role of content when your buying cycles are, years long sometimes. So in each of these interviews, I asked these leaders, how is your team structured? What's working? What isn't? How do you measure this? And I'm happy to say that the ebook is now live. You can go check it out. The URL is tinyurl.com/mint-report. So that's mint-report. Or you can just head to our homepage, mintcopywritingstudios.com, and you'll find it right there as an announcement. We also have a virtual event coming up next week where I'll present some of the findings, and I'll also be joined by some of the people that I interviewed as part of this ebook. Anyway, let's get to today's episode, which is also very relevant to this topic. Now, with AI, I think we can all agree creating content is easier than ever. But proving that it drives revenue, influences buyers, and kind of builds a brand, it's getting harder, really. So in this episode, I'm joined by Tom Rudnai, founder and CEO of Demand Genius. He's got tons of experience working across multiple SaaS companies, and he's worked at the intersection of sales, growth, and enterprise SaaS. Demand Genius helps B2B marketers build brands that win in the AI era by turning content into a measurable growth engine. And yes, I know I just said that SaaS and FinTech are different. However, he still has some very interesting insights as well as a tool that can help you understand a little bit what the impact the content has on your marketing. So in this conversation, we explore why most content fails to drive revenue and what information gain really means in AI, the AI era, how AI is reshaping content discovery, the difference between influencing buyers early versus capturing demand at the bottom of the funnel. We have a nice little debate about that. And how to use content to support sales conversations and actually accelerate deal velocity. If right now you're focused on pipeline, positioning, content, then this episode is for you. Let's hear from Tom. You're listening to the FinTech Marketing Lab podcast. I'm Araminta from Mint Studios, a content marketing agency specialized in the fintech space. And this podcast is where we experiment, explore, and break down how fintech marketing actually works in practice. Each episode, I talk with top fintech marketers about what they're testing, what they're learning, and how they're pushing the boundaries of brand, strategy, and team building. With that, let's get into today's episode. One of the first questions I want to ask you is, in your opinion, why do you think content is often not seen as a revenue driver?
Yeah, I was thinking about that a little bit. So I think marketing as a whole isn't seen as a revenue driver. Yeah. Traditionally in B2B SaaS, certainly, and generally in B2B, right? It's always like the sales are the closers, the rainmakers, and marketing, I think, always run the risk of becoming a support function for sales, which always inevitably they're going to be, right? If you're a sales-led motion, that is kind of marketing's job, but not entirely. It's very easy for that to become too kind of subservient. And content has always existed at the more organic, less directly attributable end of marketing as well. So if marketing started with that, then content is bunched in most of all. But it's an attribution problem, not an impact problem, right? Because actually content is the channel that has an impact across literally every metric. If you're nailing that and you have great pieces of brand kind of pillar content going out, it supports sales very heavily. I think it's changing a little bit as PLG, as buyer behavior changes, basically. So as buyers don't talk to sales reps every step of the way and have these kind of long, very human intensive sales processes. I think it's putting more and more focus on content. And I think that's starting to filter through to the way that certainly marketing is prioritized within a B2B business. And as a result, content.
No, I think I agree with what you're saying. And it's interesting that you're also seeing that that's kind of changing. I also feel like I'm seeing that more people are keen to have attributable content. So I don't know if this is a change in the market, but just more and more people are like not willing so much to create content that is harder to track. Are you seeing that as well?
I think I'm seeing people go in both directions. I'm seeing some people really lean into, and I think it's particularly I think the key difference is where there's a PLG motion or a freemium motion. I am seeing a lot more people lean into brand spend, which encapsulates all different forms of content, and being quite willing to get away from every department having their own kind of trackable revenue number that they're all KPI, and viewing revenue as a whole, and understanding that you have to make a decision as to whether you're comfortable with making those investments and therefore not having every little piece be attributable or not. But I definitely see some businesses going in the same route. And I think it's something that I think a lot of content and kind of organic focus teams struggle with and feel quite handcuffed by, which it sounds like is what you see as well. It feels like it's I guess for you, is it an obstacle that you have to overcome with clients because they're like, how can you help us get around this? Or?
I think I have a selection bias, obviously, because the people who reach out to us are clearly wanting to create content that delivers measurable pipeline, right? Like that's because that's what we do. So they reach out to us. So I don't always see the other side. So it's hard for me to, and maybe that's why I think I'm seeing more of it. It's because, well, more people are reaching out to us. But I think it's also because there is more pressure from leadership to be able to hit those metrics, just as the tech industry has changed and there isn't money flowing around like there used to be. I remember 3 or 4 years ago, people would reach out and be like, look, we just want to create great content. We just want the best content. Don't hear that so much anymore. And I think that's also because of AI, to be honest, because now AI, a lot of people are just using AI to create content, and maybe it's not the best possible content quality-wise, but it kind of meets the standards. So then they reach out to us and they're like, okay, well, we are creating content, but it's not bringing in customers. Can you help us? That's kind of what I am seeing. But yeah, it's an interesting market dynamic. What would you say is then like a big opportunity that you're seeing in content? Because so much has happened, right? You've got AI. As you're seeing yourself, content is part of the whole marketing, especially in B2B, the whole marketing kind of funnel and everything. So what are you seeing people maybe are ways that are underutilizing content?
I think if we think about the content itself, the biggest thing for me is that information gain is something I would treat as like a North Star of a content strategy now. I think AI is a really, really huge shift to the way that a content marketing team needs to operate, right? So traditional content marketing, the way I think of it is you find a really common query that your audience has, a question that they ask a lot, and you synthesize knowledge against that question. And if you do the best job of synthesizing all of existing knowledge to answer that query, you're the one who wins the traffic. And then you have an on-site conversion funnel, which takes all of this kind of nebulous, not necessarily related to you traffic, and tries to build a relationship based on what you actually want to talk to those people about. And that's always been a part of the attribution problem as well, right? Is that it's a funnel, but it has to be very broad on the top because we're obsessed with traffic. I think that role of a content marketer is a complete mindset shift that people have to make, that I think a lot of people now are struggling to make. Because what does AI do? On a personal, bespoke basis with full understanding of all of your context and all of your requirements and who you are, it synthesizes knowledge. So that workflow, that kind of user job to be done disappears entirely. So as a content marketer, how can you add value to humans? How can you produce content that's going to be picked up by machines as well? You have to produce some kind of meaningful advancement of knowledge. So in terms of where the opportunity exists, we've built this framework for measuring information gain that puts it into tiers. There's a first tier, and then there's the second tier, which is empirical gain, and then there's conceptual gain. And so you can kind of rank them. I think getting up, most content exists in 0, which is there is no information gain. It is just reframing things that already exist. tier 1 is adding a bit of a new slant or something that exists, and then you can go up from there. I think I would make my goal being to have as much in that tier 2 and tier 3 information gain level, because then you're doing a job that AI can't do, but that creates a value for your content.
And what do you think is the best way to do that? Because another thing that I've seen is, 4 or 5 years ago, people would say, oh, can you not just do desk research and create the content? And we don't hear that anymore, because everyone understands that what's the point? You're not adding anything new to the conversation. AI can do that as well. We used to get pushback, and we had to say, no, let's interview the experts. We don't get pushback anymore. Now we have no problem interviewing experts. But how would you, what are the best ways to create that content that is different, as you say, that's that tier 2 type content?
Yeah, I think it depends on the subject matter that you're talking about. So one of the things, I'm having great fun vibe coding at the moment, and I vibe coded this little tool that basically takes a content brief or a piece of content, assesses the information gain score level, and tells you where the opportunity is to elevate it to tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, which is cool. It was great fun building it. I love the code. What it showed me in doing it, though, is that actually not everything can reach tier 3, which is conceptual information gain. That's that you've come up with something genuinely novel, a new way of thinking, a new framework. Not everything lends itself to that. So I think what I find helpful is when you're looking at this to be deliberate. Okay, for the topic that we're looking to talk about, what is attainable and realistic? Now, obviously, empirical information gain, it requires some resources, but most topics you can go and do that. You can capture data relative to something that is an information gap in our collective knowledge, whether it's surveys or something else. And you can have a high degree of confidence that based on hypotheses you've set, you will be able to produce that empirical information gain. Conceptual is a lot more hard to define. It's a lot more unlikely. So there's a very good chance that if you're pursuing that, you will sometimes fall short of it, or the data won't turn out that everyone's wrong in the way that you hoped, because in most walks of life, not everyone is wrong.
Yeah.
So I think, empirical is easy. I think it's very difficult to produce that third tier of it. One thing we've found very effective is using AI to capture data and to look into things. So you can do traditional methods where you're going and surveying. I mean, we're lucky in that what we are looking into is AI, and so AI is naturally very good at helping us look into that. But you can just run analysis at a scale that you've probably never dreamt before. So for us, we can run hundreds of thousands of prompts. We can analyze hundreds of thousands of pieces of content across all of the FinTech industry to produce a report that looks at trends that we can extract from that. If you think creatively about, if I was going to spend a year reading something over and over and over again and just doing a task, and what would that produce, then I'm sure you can find use cases in your world where AI can produce really interesting data for your potential customers.
I mean, I think there's kind of a few ways that you can add value. You can get proprietary data, as you said, and also interview your experts. The experts are the people who know things that an AI will likely not know. And so kind of gathering those two kind of inputs are a good way to create higher quality. And maybe let's try and be more specific, because I think we're being quite high level. If we take an accounting tool, for example, and maybe they do something a bit unique. I don't know. They integrate somehow with the government. I don't know. What are some examples of maybe how you would do that tier 1, that tier 2, tier 3 type content? How would that different type of content look like?
So I think tier 1 is going to be a reframing of something that people already know, right? So we're doing the synthesis job, but we're just adding our own unique slant based on probably some really good work that we've done in the past. And that, I think, should be kind of the base standard for virtually everything. If you don't have something meaningful to say on it, it's if you when you're a kid, if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all. If you don't have something interesting to say, don't write the content. And I think that's a good basic principle. Tier 2 in that example, I guess, is going to be something like, okay, we surveyed 100 people working in the government to find out whether integrating it with accounting tools is a problem for them. Right? At the most basic level is that, or I'm sure there's a lot more stuff peripheral to it. Tier 3 would be a deep study into why society has changed in such a way as now government has to integrate with accounting tools. So you can see why there's a very good chance that at the end of that, you realize that hasn't actually really happened. That's the kind of thing that you're looking to get, I suppose. And if you do, one of the things that excites me about this is if we think in traditional terms of distribution, if you can get that picked up by LLMs and you can make a new concept that you have introduced, like core to their understanding of your problem space, the distribution that a piece of tier 3 content can achieve is basically unlimited, because it becomes literally like a part of our collective understanding of the category. The way that problems are framed to every buyer starts to reflect that new concept that you've introduced. And then that's how you move beyond kind of citation chasing in AEO, because then whether your brand is cited or not, that's impacted it, and that's going to kind of push the way that problems are framed in your direction.
And we'll talk about AEO in a second, because I think, the report that you did there was a few things that were interesting there that I kind of wanted to ask about. But then just to bring it back, those 3 examples you shared, I would describe them all as kind of top of the funnel content. So it's interesting how, because I was going to ask you, is it still worth it? Because a lot of people in the SEO space say, no, not worth it, because AI answers those anyway. But what you're saying is kind of, you can still do top of the funnel. It just really has to be unique and different, right? Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah, I would say, I think the goal of top of funnel is the same as it always has. You're trying to impact the way that people frame problems. The challenge is you're now trying to do it through an intermediary. So you need to be able to work through AI. Now, I think the reason that we like in the industry to say that top of funnel content isn't worth it anymore is not because it's not having an impact, but because we can't measure that impact.
Exactly.
One of my critical kind of like my opinions that maybe a bit more controversial on the AEO space is it's all been defined entirely through an SEO lens. And that makes sense. Like, who took an interest in it, first of all? It's only one letter different, the acronym. So the SEOs took an interest in it. The SEO platforms built solutions for it. And we looked at everything in that, like, okay, a prompt and a keyword, roughly the same thing. Let's go and see if we rank for them. I don't think that's very helpful. I don't think it reflects the way the models actually work. And if you're tracking, one thing we know from our study is that at the top of the funnel, brands are not cited. That doesn't mean that brands aren't influencing it, right? They're influencing the narrative around the category, the way the problems are framed. There's an analogy I like to use going back to my sales days, right? Which is when I got an RFP, a request for proposal through from a company, I could straight away read that and I knew which of our competitors had helped write it. And when I got that, it didn't say that expressly at any point. And when I got that, I knew we'd lost a deal, because they were asking really prominently about integration. Someone else had helped them write it. I hadn't. I'd just been sent it. I was the validation. And I think there's a very similar analogy in AEO. And I think that is where really the long-term category defining opportunity is. If you can learn how to influence the way that they frame problems. I could go on for days about that and how the models kind of converge on answers, but maybe we can come back to that.
Well, it's an interesting point. I would totally agree with you. And I think it comes ultimately to positioning. And I like the phrase ideology because it's a bit more extreme. But if you have an ideology, a point of view on something, then it's a lot easier to influence anything, right? It could be LLMs, it could be SEO, it could be people, because suddenly you have something different. And our POV has always been straightforward, which is we believe content should bring in conversions in a way that's trackable, right? Which not everyone agrees with, which is perfect. That's what you want, right? You don't want everyone to agree with your point of view. If not, it's not a point of view, right? So I was going to ask, what would you say is Demand Genius's POV? And also later on, we can talk about so then how do you track that? Because although I totally agree about, or the fact that brands don't come up, you still have to talk to your CFO who's going to ask why invest in this. But first question, what is Demand Genius's point of view?
Yeah. Oh, that's a very good question. I think so. The awful answer is I'm a fan of ADHD. I think we've got 12. That's because I can't focus on things. I would say our point of view on the AI space is that it is a fundamentally different problem to SEO, and that it is the winners of the people who win AI search will be those who can demonstrate fit for the right criteria rather than ranking against specific queries. What I mean by that is probably useful to go. So one thing that our study showed is there's very, very little variability in what brands are cited at the bottom of the funnel. Right? The we developed called a K number, which basically shows you how many if you run the same prompt over and over again, how many times do we just see the same brands come up again? And at the bottom of funnel conversion focused queries, the K number is virtually 1, which means it's the same brands that just repeatedly come up. So what really matters is whether the option pool is narrowing in your favor. Right. Another one of our kind of core beliefs in this space is that we treat prompts as isolated events, and they very much are not. Right. A prompt that we track at the bottom of the funnel doesn't just happen. There's a series of conversations in a complex journey that take you to that point. And during that time, criteria are applied, which inform who ranks or who is visible in that end state. And we know that it's largely predetermined in that bottom of funnel query. So where the opportunity is not small optimizations at the bottom of the funnel, but actually, if we can go further up the funnel and we can make more of these chains of prompts, more of these chains of conversations converge in our direction. That's our point of view, and that's what we help you do, is act on that and do it in a way which is still measurable. And I would disagree slightly that things like that aren't measurable. I think one thing AI is fantastic at doing is turning probabilistic data into something quantifiable, or doing qualitative analysis in a way which produces a quantifiable output. So we can analyze 100,000 pages of content, score them on information gain, and all of a sudden information gain is a KPI. That was something that would have been impossible 5 years ago, but now you can treat something like that as a KPI, and we can do a lot of the same things when it comes to things like understanding how our narrative is impacting the overall market narrative, because AI can understand that. We can do sentiment analysis. We can pick up semantic kind of links between different phrases and stuff like that.
And how would you pick those? Because yes, I think it makes sense what you're saying. You need to go, I guess, higher up in the funnel. It's kind of what you're saying, and influence them earlier on. But how do you know which prompts they are putting in at that stage? What are the topics that they're searching? How do you know what you're targeting there?
Yeah, another one of my core beliefs is AEO is not a project. It's not a one and done thing. It's an ongoing muscle, right? And I think that will be a part of the muscle that you have to have. But it's the same as anything else. It's the same as how do you find the keywords at the top of the funnel that you want to go and try and hit on. Well, you have to constantly look for them, talk to your buyers, understand what they're searching. It's all of the fundamentals of getting to know your customers. You can do that through talking to them, like in the real world, and you can do that through data and performance data and buyer journey data, and understanding, okay, what are they reading at each stage of their journey? And from that, you can kind of work back to the questions that brought them there. And see, there's no perfect way, but there's lots of signals that you can look at to get there.
And it's the same with the bottom of the funnel. Like, people always ask us, okay, how do you know what prompts or topics to go after? Well, speak to your salespeople. What are the questions that keep coming up and all that? I would also say that, although I agree that it's worth influencing them as early as possible, that doesn't mean you shouldn't influence at the bottom of the funnel, because for all the AEO programs that we do with our clients, that is what we do. We actually mainly target the bottom of the funnel because, as you've said in your reports, that's the only time that brands even appear. And so we have been able to influence and change those results, and it has led to an increase in inbounds. Actually, we've had a couple of clients that went from zero visibility, not turning up at all in any of those lists, to turning up regularly and seeing a substantial increase in inbounds coming through that channel. So it definitely does work. What I have seen is that it takes a little bit longer. It's a little bit harder if it's a very saturated market where companies create a lot of content already. So maybe SaaS, for example. And it is maybe harder if, having said that though, we have a client where they're competing with Stripe. They're competing with enormous companies that publish a lot of content, and we've still been able to get them in those lists. So from our experience, I think it's worth doing both, basically. Definitely do the bottom of the funnel, because that's where you'll see the biggest impact, and that's where you'll see the results that you can then show your leaders and CFO and all that. But then same with everything else in marketing, you definitely want to go up towards the higher end of the funnel, because that's what's going to influence down the line. It just might be harder to show that it's influenced pipeline, just because it takes longer, right? But that's kind of what we've seen as well on our end.
Yeah, well, which is interesting. And maybe I'm being a little bit too foolish in the way that I frame this, because one of the things that we learned from our study that we did, and what we did there, was we were trying to simulate complex journeys. So we were running prompts within the same category, the same journey at awareness, consideration, conversion stage. And what we found was only 16% of those prompts ever produced a citation, and they were all in the conversion stage. So you're absolutely right in what you're saying. That's kind of completely borne out in the data. And so citations is a useful metric, but it's not a very useful North Star metric, we find, for influence, because you're limiting yourself to 16% of your potential influence. The way that I think of it is as an iceberg, right? So what you see, if you're tracking traffic to your site and brand citations, mentions, you are seeing the tip of the iceberg. right? You're seeing the conversion stage, and we know in the more complex the journey, the smaller, the less critical conversion stage is to the overall who wins, who loses. So it's useful to see that, and you absolutely want to be visible for those. But if that's all you're focused on, then everything beneath the surface, which is the iceberg analogy that was very familiar, right? Is that's where the mass is, and that's where the meat is, and the opportunity is what you risk overlooking, I guess.
I think the mistake that maybe marketers have made in the past is they only do the chunk underwater, the stuff that, as you say, is the biggest opportunity. But the thing is that if you cannot prove it, you will not be given the budget to invest in that chunk underwater, right? And so that's why we focus on the chunk that is visible. And yes, there's a smaller proportion. However, I will say people always underestimate how big it is. It might sound small, 16%, but it's actually a lot bigger, especially when the intent is a lot higher. And that's why we always say, you want to be doing both. We'll take care of the part at the top, the 16%, because that's what allows you to prove and show that it's working, etc. But you do need to do the rest as well. We even have a client that was like, no, let's just do the bottom of the funnel. It's working super well. We're getting lots of inbounds. And we were like, please invest in other stuff internally. Like, this is not what we do, but you need to do that, because if not, you're missing out on a much bigger part of the marketing funnel and of your target audience. But it's an interesting kind of dilemma, because what's trackable is also super important, because if not, leaders nowadays need to see what's working and all that. But anyway, so we're going very deep into content frameworks and all that. I wanted to talk also about like distribution channels, because LLMs are a distribution channel, but you've said, and I know this is a big part of what Demand Genius does, is kind of, salespeople are a fantastic distribution channel. And I totally agree with that. I find that the biggest blocker there is that, it's hard to encourage them to share it, right? Maybe it's a culture thing, or maybe it's just hard for them to find the content. What have you found works there? How do you encourage salespeople to distribute content?
Yeah, well, maybe this is where I have quite a unique background for someone who works in content, and I don't think a lot of people have gone from being kind of a sales rep, recovering sales rep, into the world of content. How do you get a salesperson to do anything? You show them why it makes them money, right?
Yeah.
I think there's two things I would say. One is have a conversation about how you can remove whatever the barriers are to them showing content, and take that seriously. Like, I'll give you an example. Going back to one of the roles that I had, one thing I had said over and over again is I just really don't like sending a prospect that I've just spent a lot of time building a relationship with to a gated thing when I can download the PDF. And that was always a sticking point. It felt to me like we're prioritizing marketing's attribution needs over my relationship with the person who spent $500,000 on a piece of software. No deal. So that's one thing where I think put work from customer experience to your attribution in the right priority order. And that's where sometimes the sales reps aren't as evil and as self-motivated as they're often presented, and often it is stuff like that actually is holding them back, or at least is why you don't see them sharing it. The bigger impact is going to come from getting, ironically, your attribution sorted in such a way as you can show, like, I think of there's two forms of attribution I always think of. Political attribution, like now with a kind of negative connotation that it would maybe carry, but it's about proving the impact that you're having. And that's great, that's fine, that's important. And then there's like practical attribution, which is understanding, going back to your question around what prompts to track, understanding what are people reading in every stage of the journey, how does that engagement impact what we care about. So it's not difficult analysis. It's something within the platform we do out of the box, but you can do it if you're really good with Looker and you get access to your CRM data. You can see, okay, when there's 2 content engagements or 2 stakeholders engaging with content versus 3, how does that impact the speed with which a deal closes? How does that impact which stages it gets stuck at? Where are things getting stuck, and are we getting content engagement? If we have a bottleneck in technical stage of our process, things are getting stuck there for 3 months, and we're having no content engagement during that point. Well, that's a content gap. We look at content gaps exclusively by interest and by our kind of top of funnel SEO, where are the high intent queries, rather than those kinds of gaps. But you can go and look at that data. That allows you to make yourself really, really useful to sales, because if that's happening, I promise you, it is probably their biggest pain point day to day, that they are under pressure to chase and to maintain relationships with their kind of buyers during that 3-month period where it's blocked. And they really want to be able to do that in a way which isn't chasing them and being annoying, but their boss is telling them to get an update and giving them content that they can use in that stage so that it's organic. Here's some insight. By the way, what's going on? They will love it. And then also proving why doing that actually closes deals faster at a higher value and makes it more likely to pay.
Yeah, no, that's great. I think there's definitely a top-down thing. The head of sales or the sales leader needs to be the one, I think, rather than the marketer. Showing this, because I think salespeople might be skeptical and be like, okay, what do you know? Whereas if their sales leader is the one who says, look, this has proven to increase the close rate by X% or whatever, then it's worth it, and then they're more likely to listen. So there's also a culture thing, which is also, I think, where it can be tricky. What have you found works best for how salespeople can find that content? Do you find that companies, maybe they have like a Notion document with a list? Do they have like a repository? What have you seen works best here? And also later on, let's talk about how Demand Genius also kind of helps with that side of things.
Yeah, I mean, so I think my general philosophy for stuff like that is repositories. It's a good first step. Ideally, you want to put that stuff in their workflow rather than have it be either something that sits in an email update or something like that. So a custom GPT that allows, like the simple version, and everyone is perfectly technically capable of doing this, is create a custom GPT, train on all the content you have, give it to your sales reps and say, if you're wondering what you can share, pop your question into this, it'll do it. That's a pretty basic thing to build that will help them a lot more than a great big Notion documentary. And it's also easier for you to maintain because you don't have to worry quite so much about the classification. It can do that for you. So I think that's the simplest solution. We've got some stuff that we've thought about that don't have it at the moment, but in terms of like actually integrating like all of the performance data into that, so you can be a lot more prescriptive, and that there's certainly some cool stuff that someone could do and we might do there. But I think the basic level is put it in their workflow rather than just giving them a link somewhere.
I think that's really good. That's good advice. And so I know we can't show video really because this is a listening podcast mostly. How would you describe or explain that Demand Genius helps with tracking and showing kind of some of these metrics? So for example, I know that you can show that, the content has helped with sales, has helped speed up certain sales cycles. So what are some of these metrics that you can see in the platform that helps marketers and salespeople, I guess, as well, track and see the impact of content?
Yeah, the easiest way I can explain it is always very bad for podcasts because I like to draw little diagrams. But the way I think there's two bits of data that you need to connect in order for that to happen, right? You have your web engagement data and your kind of CRM deal data. Now, HubSpot, for example, is doing a much better job now of connecting those things. If you use HubSpot, CRM plus CMS, you might be in a decent spot there. Most people, the CMS and the CRM are different things entirely, and they don't talk to each other at all. So they're the two things that you need to connect. So Demand Genius very simply sits as a layer in between those two things. We integrate with both. That allows you to solve a few problems. It allows you to track which LLMs, like go all the way back and see which LLMs are actually leading to closed won deals. It allows you to map everything that people are reading along the way and give you that like detailed, practical insight that you can use to understand, okay, what prompts should we be tracking? And that's one of the things that like nice pain points that we just put on autopilot. We will constantly analyze your data and surface the prompts that seem to be making an impact so that you kind of don't have to have that headache. And then to prove the impact that you're having as well. And not just prove it against milestones that you care about in terms of MQL close one, which, I mean, for most sales-led businesses, that might be 12 months apart, but actually look at how you're impacting the intervening space as well, because suddenly you can start looking at, okay, demo, technical, proposal, all of those stages that we pull from the CRM and understanding what engagement you're driving in each one of them. So it allows you to be a lot more surgical in your content strategy and give other people around the organization information on how that's working.
Yeah. And I think that the opportunity really here is that the content that isn't so bottom of the funnel, which is more like higher level and will take months before someone closes, it allows you to take that content and kind of see the role it plays in the kind of sales cycle, right? That PDF or guide that they downloaded 12 months ago, now you can see how that was a touch point that 12 months later led to a closed deal, right?
Yeah, exactly that. And see which stakeholders it's impacting and stuff like that. When you talk about sales and marketing alignment, and also just the ability to take a content roadmap from something that's very top of funnel, topical, to something that's actually looking at, I use that word surgical again, like surgically looking for gaps and bottlenecks in the buyer journey and seeing how content, and to your original question of why is content not seen as a revenue driver, that's where it comes full circle, because suddenly you are, right? If you're like, that's the language that a CRO or a CEO speaks. If you're like, I can improve your close rate and improve your deal velocity, they will listen and they will give you budget.
Exactly. Well, now that you've done this for a few companies, it'd be interesting to hear, like, what are some top of the funnel content pieces or types of content that you've seen that maybe people historically would be like, yeah, not sure really if this has much of an impact, but we know it's good. And now you're able to see, okay, this is really having an impact. Is there any things like that have maybe surprised you, or that you have seen have an outsized impact that maybe people didn't imagine they would?
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't know that I've really looked into the data to understand that enough. Certainly, I think from kind of anecdotally, from looking across different clients that we've worked with, it varies very much company to company. It's not quite as simple as being like across all clients, white papers are doing fantastically well.
True.
Or across all clients, lead gen tools are doing fantastic well, or something, anything like that. So generally speaking, in terms of formats, the picture looks roughly as you would expect it to look in terms of what they engage with where. You see a correlation that as they move through the funnel, it gets more like to meaty content, I guess, because you get more engagement. But I've not looked into the data at an aggregate level to give you a really good answer to that.
Yeah, but I guess it would be interesting. Maybe once you have like hundreds of clients, you can see a little bit like any patterns, because I think this is where there's no denying the opportunity. The content that will have probably the biggest impact is often the one that's hardest to track, right? So it'd be really interesting to see maybe if we can get closer to tracking that. Like, what is that? I'd be interested in that. If you ever do a report on that, let me know. I will read that.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, one thing that I'm quite excited about with what we can eventually do is like, I think what Gong has done in sales intelligence. There's an opportunity to do something like that in content intelligence, which would be really cool. We just need people to consent to us using their data for aggregated reports.
True. Yeah, that's true. You've also, in your report, talked about dark AI, which I thought was an interesting phrase. Can you explain a bit what that means? And I mean, it's kind of back to what we were talking about earlier, but yeah, what does that mean, and what role does that play in content marketing?
Yeah, and sorry, I probably find myself squeezing it into every conversation now, far earlier than I should, because it's what I spend my whole day thinking about. What we think of as dark AI is everything beneath the surface in that iceberg analogy that I gave you. So at the moment, the AI impact that you're seeing is limited to that 16% of the conversion, which is about half of the conversion-oriented prompts, which are showing up in citations, and then I don't actually know the exact click-through rate for a citation, because it's hard to measure for a citation in AI through to your website, but your traffic is showing a fraction of, it's a fraction of the 16%. So I think there's two things. That should give people a lot of confidence in their AEO strategy, because if that's the impact you're seeing and measuring, just think how much impact it's actually having. It also should give them a little bit of pause for thought and think, okay, we kind of need to get a grip on what's happening with the rest of it. So dark AI is the 84% basically that sits in awareness and consideration stages, that is impacting how problems are framed, how requirements are built for each customer, and ultimately, I think it's where categories are going to be won and lost.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting you say that, because I would say, and I agree with what you said, that I think AEO, or people are seeing AEO through a lens of SEO when they are. So I wouldn't say that it's very important whether they click on that or not. Like, to me, LLMs are more of a discoverability platform rather than a search. I mean, they're both, but I would say they're mostly to discover new topics and new solutions. And so that's why with most of our clients, we try and ask them, we track LLM traffic, but it's more of an interesting metric. Doesn't really mean anything to us. What's more interesting is, the self-attribution. So when someone submits a form, we ask them, how did they hear about us, blah, blah. And we have found actually no correlation between LLM traffic and number of LLM leads. So you'll find, like, I was going to do a LinkedIn post about this. Clients where LLM traffic has increased, LLM leads have decreased. Opposite, LLM traffic kind of has gone up and down, maybe down a little bit. LLM leads have skyrocketed. So it's interesting how, this is like kind of to support your point on dark AI, you can't even use like website really metrics to track dark AI. You just need to ask the user. And it's back to that dark social whole thing, Chris Walker and all that, kind of a similar you just ask your users is the best way to really to find out how they find out about you.
Yeah, I agree. And I think the only difference that I would say there is between dark social and dark AI is that you can ask the AI. Whereas dark social is a WhatsApp chat that you can't query 1,000 times and do really
And
deep
understand.
analysis of the narrative. You have another route that you can take.
That's true. And that's why I probably like dark AI more. There's more to do there. It's more interesting, or there's more you can do with it, I guess, from an analytics standpoint. So that's what makes it interesting.
I think it's less of a black box.
Exactly.
I think we haven't worked out, and I think we're doing as good a job as anyone, but we haven't worked out how to unpick the black box exactly. I think we're doing well, but it's a fun journey to go on.
Exactly. It's very fun. And my last question is, let's talk a bit about the future. With everything that's changing, attribution's harder, but also there's more you can do, AI, all of that. What do you think content's going to look like in 5 years? And also, how do you see Demand Genius kind of play a role in that?
Yeah, there's two things that come to mind. I think one thing, not even the next 5 years, but like now, I think the definition of content can become a lot broader. Like I said, I spend a lot of time having a lot of fun vibe coding. I view that as content that I'm producing. That information gain calculator, that's content. You can code content now. And that opens up a lot in terms of how we try to take all of this hard to track AI. Like if the words and the information is a lot harder to generate conversions and relationships off of, or maybe we can build genuine value add things on top and just give it away because it's so cheap for us to make and easy for us to make. And that can help solve some of those problems. So I think the definition of what is content can expand. I also think in terms of the website, we will see much, much lower volume of much, much more dynamic content. I think one of the challenges of the SEO lens, where we basically say, keyword equal a prompt and a keyword are the same thing, and we're going to go and we're going to churn out loads of pieces of content to try and keep up with the sheer number of possible prompts that you could have within a complex journey. It leads to this massive expansion of the complexity of your sitemap. What we said initially actually impacts AI performance is positioning. I think of it as there's 3 like points on a triangle: positioning, content, reputation. Your goal is to keep those 3 things as closely aligned as they can possibly be. And then you create no spaces. My hypothesis, I can't prove this yet, is that that's why comparison content works so well. Because for most brands, those 3 points are really disconnected because the brand has evolved over 10 years. So you've created all of these contradictions, all of these ambiguities. Who you were then doesn't line up with your latest content and your latest reviews. And so you're confusing in an LLM as to who you actually are because it looks at all of the information, not just the latest stuff that you've got on your product page. So your goal is to keep those 2 things as close as possible, at which point this like content debt becomes a real problem. If you have 2,000, we started working with a client with 10,000 pieces of content, how on earth do you ensure that you're clear and consistent across all of that content, let alone all of the reviews? You can't. So I think in this kind of era, less high quality, genuine information gain content that can also ultimately will dynamically alter for different user groups and based on the prompt that's set them there. And there'll be all sorts of stuff that happens there because we can make such advanced decisions in real time. And that's how you'll create the effect of the SEO era where it's lots of pieces of content for different user intentions. We'll have smaller pieces that then evolve for each specific user. Create the breadth of coverage without creating the complexity.
Yeah, and it's an interesting thing where having really tight positioning, really clear positioning, it will benefit you so much, like in such huge ways that maybe just producing lots of content cannot. Like it'll benefit in ways that are completely outsized compared to just creating lots of content. And I think, and it's interesting because tight positioning, that's a CEO product, like every single department has to be involved in that. And that's where the hard work really is.
And I think it still requires humans as well, which is shit for some people. So good time to be a product marketer. I'd suggest everyone goes and gets a bit involved in that because I think it's the part that is going to be the hardest for AI to replace. But I think it's a good maybe it's a nice tone to end on. All it is it's coming back to like actual traditional brand marketing, like fundamentals of marketing. AI, like if we think of it as an extension of search, it is a huge leap forward in the ability of search to reflect humans. And so you do the fundamentals that are great for reaching and convincing or influencing humans.
No, couldn't agree more. Amazing. Well, thanks so much, Tom. This has been really interesting. And I love the work you're doing at Demand Genius. So keep doing that. And look forward to catching up again.
Thank you for having me on.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Thanks for listening. You can find show notes and information about guests at www.mintcopywritingstudios.com/podcast. And finally, huge thanks to orama.tv for producing this podcast. Thanks for listening, and see you at the next episode.